Here today, I flew down especially to be with my parents and my Tante Mabel. And the reason we're here recording this is we want to capture the spirit of their youth, their parents' youth, and mine, and my sisters. Today's January 27th, 1990. It's a bright sunny day, as you can see, and we're really to record our heritage. So I'd like to introduce the key stars and players of this tape. First is my father, Ken Gran. Next is my dear darling Tante Mabel, his older sister, and my sweet mom, Betty Gran.
Sweet.
We thought we'd start out with Norway, which is where my father's parents came from. And he's got a lot of stories that he used to tell when I was a little girl on his knee about Bastamore and the wolves and the bears. Didn't you, honey?
Oh, yes. My mother used to tell me these stories when I was on her knee. The first one I want to tell is a story she used to tell me about her mother's grandmother, I believe. It goes way back. Used to herd sheep in the mountains. And alongside of the meadow, there's a big forest. And of course, this forest had a lot of animals in it. But this one particular story she used to tell me, her grandmother herding the sheep. And every day, a bear would come out of the woods. And that bear would sit down on his haunches, he'd look at the sheep, and he could imagine what a dinner he was going to have. He'd sit, imaginary now, he'd sit there, lick his chops, and going like this, combing his hair in preparation for a big dinner. Then he'd get up and he'd walk over trying to catch a sheep. But my grandmother, my mother's grandmother, had 2 dogs with her that were pretty well trained. One dog would go in front of the bear and bark at him, and the other dog would go behind and nip at him. And the bear would twirl around.
Oh.
And the dog that had done the first nipping would then bark. The other dog would nip. And they were going nip and bark, till the bear finally gave up and go back into the woods. The end of that episode. The same thing would happen the next day. There was another story my mother used to tell me about her great uncle. He didn't have a well on his farm, so what he had to do, he had to go down by the river and get water. This was fine, except on a cold winter day, he would hitch the horses up to his sled. He had a big wooden water tank on the sled, and he took his axe along to chop a hole in the ice. Well, it so happened that this one day he got about halfway there, and wolves started coming out of the timber. Wolves. And they were hungry wolves, howling. So what he did, he unhitched the horses, slapped them on the rump, and told them, let them run on home. Then he took the water tank, turned it upside down, crawled under there with his axe. Pretty soon he heard the wolves jumping on top of the tank, and they were going to try and get a meal from him, out of him. They would dig. Pretty soon their paws would start coming under the tank, and he'd take the axe and chop their feet. Whoa. Well, when the wolves smelled blood, they went crazy and started attacking and fighting each other. Now, I don't know how many wolves they killed, but pretty soon it got quiet, and when the horses had come home, so, the people in the home had realized that something was wrong, so they came to his rescue. Well, by that time the wolves were already gone. But anyway, that's the end of that story. I guess it turned out all right. What?
I thought wolves weren't supposed to attack humans.
Oh, well.
That's what they tell us.
I don't, well, that's what caused me to ask Ma. I asked her, Ma, it is psycho retirement, which means, Ma, is this the truth that you're telling me? She sat back and says, Han lever, han som ses förtärde, which means, he who last told the story is still alive, which means take it or leave it. So those are 2 of the old stories that Mom used to tell me about what happened many, many years ago in the old country. Mabel, do you have any more that Mom used to tell you that you know, that I think maybe are stretched a little bit?
Well, maybe just about this woman that lived on farm too, and she was a step-grandmother or something, and she was very clumsy and stumbling around all the time, and I don't know if you know what flatbread is. Do you know what flatbread is?
Yeah,
The
we know
flatbread. Yes. Well, good, all in all, you just know that. And she was to carry the whole pile of flatbread out into the storehouse. They have a storehouse, stubud, as they call it in Norway. And she went along and she stumbled on a stone. And that sharp nose went down through every one of those flatbread. And what did she do? Immediately went an axe and started to pound that stone. And Mama says she doesn't know how many times that woman stumbled on that stone, but each time she'd get an axe to pound it down into the ground. Of course, she never did. But we all laughed when we did it.
Why couldn't she step over it?
Well, it's
She stumbled.
Well,
Connor
how many
put
lived in that house? Your mom was one of 13, and you're talking about a grandmother or a step-grandmother?
She was a step-grandmother.
Uh-huh.
Oh, 13 children. Yes, but they didn't all live there at once when they grow to be
Hey, when you get that
16,
many, one
17.
more or less doesn't make any difference.
Oh, well. that's
Because in the
all right.
lead-
Based on-
They went out.
The next room are the cattle.
Yeah.
All the children went out working.
It's all,
Well, that's
everybody lived in
right.
one building. The cattle help keep the house warm, I guess.
Yeah, remember that farmhouse we saw in England? That was
Well,
supposed to
those
be
sound
old.
like pretty rugged conditions.
They were,
And that was the time when people were coming to America, the land of the free, and coming through Ellis Island. Why don't you tell us how Bastamore being my grandma, and Bastafar, my grandpa, came across? Mabel, you know a lot about that. Will you tell us how they came
I know
across?
some of it. I should be very brief though about that. My father was home when they came across. 20 years old, wasn't he?
When was he born?
He was born in 1867, and my mother was born in 1879. He was 12 years older. Most of the older men had young wives those days, I guess because he had so many children.
Oh, yeah.
And they wanted someone young to work.
To work, right.
And when they came across, my father came across alone, but my mother came across with her two brothers who had been over to Norway, and then came back and gave the folks money, and then they returned again. And she came with them. She was only 16. Worked in Minneapolis for a household of 5, 2 parents and 3 children. And she worked very hard there, but she got her board and room, but that's all. She got a dollar a week was her wages. And she did all the washing by hand, all the cooking, cleaning, and taking care of that family. And one thing she remembered about that family, she said that they were very good to her, but she couldn't understand why that little 8-month-old baby needed a starched, iron, white dress every afternoon when Daddy came home from work.
Oh.
She paid $1 for a pair of shoes, and she got $1 a week, so a week's wages bought her a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
And she struggled along like that. And then she worked for the Hoyard Company later, sewing tents. That's a big company in Minneapolis, tent and awning company, but they have everything, you know, furniture and everything. She worked there until she was married to Papa.
So she came across in 1879 when she was 16 years old. And Bastafar, no?
she was
She was
born
born in 1879. She came across in 1895, which was the same year that both my father and mother
Parents
were
were
born.
born.
Yeah.
And Papa came over when he was 20, and I think he worked for a while in Minneapolis, but he wanted to get out. And so he worked for he got a job finally on the Dalrymple Farm, which is one of those, what do they call them, not century farms, but I don't remember what they call it.
Agriculture.
It's a big farm in
Yeah,
North
big
Dakota,
farm, many
Castleton, North Dakota.
acres, many men working for them, and he worked himself up to head man there. He drove one horse and a cart all around the plantation or whatever it was, large farms, to see if the people did their work. But then he was anxious to buy a farm of his own. So when he saved up enough money for it, by the way, that farm, that home farm is still there. And it was a tree claim. You could have
Bastafar's
a
home
quarter section
farm?
of land and live on it and farm it for 1 year and it was yours, or you could plant 10 acres of trees. And he did not do that, but the man before him did. So he was the first buyer of that farm.
In Campbell?
And then in
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And the reason he
Mhm.
came was because he was a second son, wasn't he? And he couldn't farm the farm that was named
In Norway.
Gran in Norway. So he came where he could buy land of his own.
Oh.
First
You see,
son
the farm in Norway always went to the firstborn son. my father was the second born, so he had to get out and shift for himself. So he came to this country, and he took the name Gran. His name was Gran because the name of the farm he lived on was Gran, which in Norway means a evergreen tree, really, but that was the name of the farm, a spruce tree.
He also changed his name from Carl to Charles.
Oh.
Didn't he?
He did what?
He changed his name from Carl to Charles.
After
didn't
he got here,
Yeah.
yes. And then
Well,
they called
he
such a
Americanized
pretty
it.
name.
Then he
Yeah.
changed my mother's name from Gjertina to Tina.
Ah.
Called her Tina.
Yeah, it was Gjertine, Gjertine.
But they then married.
Now, how did they meet?
Well, I think they knew of each other in the old country, but he being much older than she, they didn't associate. But I guess they met somewhere in Minneapolis because the Norwegians get kind of clannish, you know, in Minneapolis.
Yeah, they
there.
So that they met, and then they came out of the farm. They were married, and a year later, my older brother Conrad was born. A year after that, my sister Mabel was born, and a year after that, my sister Gladys was born.
My goodness.
Then they took a rest.
And then what happened?
And I think it was what 6 years later for
1911.
Ralph was born, and then there were 4 more of us. So my mother always said she had 2 families, the 3 older ones, and then the 4 younger ones. And we were all, as babies, we were all cribbed in that thing back there.
Yeah.
Fact of the matter is, Laurel, you and Leslie were cribbed in that thing also.
Oh, they were such big babies,
Yeah.
they couldn't stay in it more than 2 months.
You'd crawl out
It
of
was
it.
a bassinet. No, she couldn't crawl out of it, but anyway,
But so that got them to the farm and got their families.
So they were married in 1902, and
Was it 1902 they were married? I guess it
Yes.
was. 1902.
you know, we had that picture in my bedroom. That was their wedding picture.
well, some of my favorite stories are the stories of the farm, and they are really funny. Why don't you tell us the one about the Luke's farm? I think that's one
Oh,
of the best.
Laurel, I remember that. In 1929, I guess I was about 11 or 12 years old, my father brought this brand new Chevrolet sedan. And what a prize that was. So he was going to treat the family to, well, my father's idea of treating the family to something is putting us all in the car and driving around looking at the crops. Being a farmer, you know, that was his. But I remember this one day, Mother and he and I got in that new car, and we drove around, looked at the crops. We stopped in at a neighbor's place. It was the Luke's farm. And my father was a very strict man too. No one dared object to the way he entertained the family. He was very strict. So we stopped, and Mother and my father got, I call them Pa and Ma, because that's what I called them when I was a kid, Ma and Pa. Never called them Mother and Dad, but Pa and Ma. Well, Pa and Ma got out of the car, and they went up to the house. I stayed in the car. I don't know why, I guess because nobody told me I could get out. So they went in, and that farm, of course, all farms had a porch, a screened-in porch. I sat there in the car. Pretty soon I heard the darndest racket in there, a dog yipping and Pa and Ma hollering and pots and pans stirring around. Pretty soon Ma came out and hollered, "Kenneth, come in here." And I thought, oh my gosh, Pa's gone in there and picked a fight with the Lutzes, and I've got to go in there and 11-year-old kid, what can I do? But I went in, and it so happens there was nobody home there. And I don't know what caused my parents to go in when there was nobody home, but they did. But on the front porch was this little dog that they had locked in the back porch when they were gone. It's a little rat terrier, and a nervous as all get out, nervous little dog. When Ma opened the kitchen door to go in, that little terrier went in also.
When it wasn't supposed to be in.
When it wasn't supposed to be in. So they go in and try and catch that little rat terrier. Have you heard about motorcycles going around inside of a silo, you know? Well, that little dog's going around in the walls in there, I think, because the salt and pepper shakers were off the table and the tablecloth was off. And I think the cards have been torn to shreds. They were trying to catch that little dog. They had the darndest mess in there you ever saw. But I finally caught the dog, and we closed the door. And I let the dog down on the porch and backed out the car. We go. Now, I wonder if
Luke's ever find
I
out.
wonder if Mrs. Lukes went to her grave, not knowing what happened in the kitchen. I know Bastamore Gran went to her grave, never having told any.
Never heard it before.
You never heard that story? No, nobody ever told that story. I was sworn to secrecy. I didn't dare tell back my parents were both dead.
Well, Bastamore said the one who told it's still alive.
Yeah. But as I said, my father was a very strict man, very disciplinarian. In fact, he was even, oh, I don't know the word, what's the word I'm trying to think of? He's
Very stern.
very stern and
Very strict.
not inconsiderate. But anyway,
Insensitive.
No pity.
No big.
but we had the home farm, and then we had what we called the other place, which is 160 acres across the highway. And after harvest, we always would put the cattle out there to eat the grain that was left, cattle and the horses. Well, sometimes it's kind of a tricky to the cattle. Fine, you could just send them out there. The horses, they'd get a little feisty and run all over. But Pa had a distant relative named Chris that lived with us.
Oh, Chris.
Chris had a bad leg.
Yeah, bad influence.
And a bad mind too, by the way. But anyway, when we got ready to send those horses over there this one time, Chris and Pa and I were going to do it. It was my job to open the gate to let the horses out. Chris was going to go across the road and steer them into the gate over there. Well, that's what he does best. He did his best job going over there, and my best job was to let the horses out. Pa's best job was to jump up and down, scream, holler, and swear, I guess, because he got the horses so scared that they just scattered around all over the country. Then he blamed me, of course. He started berating me, and I said, Pa, I can't run as fast as the horses. Well, that was my first mistake. No, that was my second mistake. My first mistake was not running as fast as the horses. Because, see this right here? That was the handle. He grabbed me and shook me like a cocker spaniel would shake a duck. But anyway, finally got the horses in.
Probably with no help from you.
I hadn't heard that one either.
Hadn't you heard that one? Oh boy. But here's another one. But we were loading some pigs to the market.
Oh gosh, this is
Back in those days, we didn't have a truck. We had a lumber wagon, but it's a team of horses. And what we would do, we'd have a chute and run the pigs up in the wagon. Well, everything was going fine. Martin, my older brother, was 3 years older than I. He was up in the wagon to push him forward. I was standing on the wagon wheel, trying to get him to go in. Of course, I had to hang on with one hand, and I was standing on the spokes of the wagon. Martin was 3 years older than I. Pretty soon, we start fighting. There's Martin, my older brother. He's working me over with both hands. I'm trying to hang on and fight him with one hand. And of course, it caused some confusion with the pigs. And here comes Pa, trying to see what was going on. And he saw what was going on. Well, he couldn't reach Martin up in the wagon, but by God, he could reach me. More of this. Down we go. Mabel, you have a story about
My
loading
pig story
pigs.
was much milder than that. It
Well,
wasn't there
you go ahead and tell
before.
that one.
I had to load the pigs, and Dad and I had a tough time getting them into the chute, as he says, and up into the, that was more than a wagon, it was a grain tank, you know, quite high. And we finally got them all in and got the thing closed, but then there were horses in a pasture, and the gate was open, but I saw that I got that closed, and Papa was so angry because we had such a hard time getting those pigs in, and he was to drive them to town. So he got up, and the front of a grain tank was a grain tank. It used to have a spring seat on it, but he hadn't taken time to put that on. He just laid a board across, and then partway down on the outside there's a board where you can put your feet and then sit up in there. So he finally got himself up there. He's a big man and kind of slow, but he got himself up there, you know, and he yelled at the horses to go, and off they started, you know, and the pigs were in the wagon, and that board fell in, and Papa fell backwards on the pig. I looked, all I could see was his rubber boots, knee rubber boots, sticking up in the air. and he finally got himself up and off he went to town. And I didn't dare laugh while he was there, because I'd be punished for it afterwards. But I went into the house, and I came in the house laughing. And Mama thought, what's the matter with me? And I laughed and lay down on the Davenport, and I couldn't stop. And I finally fell off the Davenport laughing. She came over to me and are you crying or are you laughing? Well, I finally calmed down enough to tell her the story. And then she laughed, and she said, oh, Channing, us sets up a push go raid, which means, oh, the woman sat down on the pig for a ride. And then we laughed all over again. And every time I think of that, I have to laugh because it was so funny. Got himself tough. He'd calm down when he got home.
Oh, I know another one, sorry, it's funny. I don't know if I've ever told you this one before or not. But Martin, who I've talked about before, 3 years older than I, we were just a little fella, I was probably about 4 and he was maybe 7. And my father had just bought a new threshing machine, and we were threshing out in the back pasture. Martin and I stood out there with our little overalls on, with holding down their suspenders, looking up there, watching what was going on. And there was Pa standing on top of the machine, surveying everything. He was master of all he surveyed. Martin looks up there and, Pa, are you going to get down from there? No answer. Pa, are you going to get down from there? Pretty soon, here comes Pa, tumbling ass over teacup. He had slipped down there, and he'd fallen. And fortunately, the ground was soft, and he hit the ground. But even more fortunately, the soft part he hit wasn't one of us kids. Well, when he hit the ground, Martin and I took off. Now, I'll give Martin credit, even at 7 years old, he was smart enough not to ask his dad if there wasn't a better way to get out. Gee, that was funny.
Yeah, well, you must realize, you know, your father was older too then, because he was 30,
he couldn't catch
he was 35 when his first child was born, like you were 35 when your first.
Well, he was in his 50s at this time.
Yeah,
but he must have slipped. That should have been easier. But. Well, you know, in spite of all these things we tell about our dad, we had a lot of good moments to it on the farm. I recall, well, how cold the winters were. And I think there's 2 or 3 of us boys and a hired man that used to sleep up in one room upstairs. And it would get cold up there in the winter. Now, this hired man had a mustache, and many of the morning I'd look over there, and there's frost on his mustache.
Didn't your dad build your house?
What?
Didn't your dad build your house?
Yeah.
With the help of other people.
Mm-hmm.
It was a white frame house.
Well, it was just a big. It was just a big house, and you didn't. All you had was hard pull heaters.
They were.
But I had this pet cat.
Oh.
And it got so cold that her ears had frozen and the tip of her tail had frozen.
Oh.
Stub?
So yeah, Stub. So I called her Stub. But he was my pal. When I sit there with the cow milking, he'd sit up here on my shoulders. I'd walk all around the yard, he'd sit on my shoulder. And I recall as I sit there and milk, he'd jump down and I'd squirt milk in his mouth. And, oh, he'd just sit up there and love that. But he was a great cat. Then I too recall, years ago, about in the early 30s, when I was a little boy, we had some visitors from Chicago. And this lady stayed there that summer, and she wanted to buy we children something to show appreciation for having stayed there. She bought me 2 little sheep.
Oh, that.
And I started to raise sheep. But I didn't have much luck. I had these sheep for years and years, and I had only gotten 1 lamb. And my father got pretty sick and tired of seeing those sheep around there because they weren't producing anything. So one day, we had to load them in the truck and down to the stockyard we took them. And you know, I got $12.50 for 3 sheep.
Oh, isn't that terrible? But $12.50 compared to now, how much would that be?
$120 or more.
Yeah, probably.
Another thing we used to do that I used to enjoy, my father used to have these cornfields. And he was hung up on getting rid of wild oats, which is a kind of a weed. So you'd have us kids run up and down the rows picking wild oats. They pull out the wild oats. And that's where the rabbits used to have their babies, back there in the cornfields. So I would catch these little rabbits and I'd put them in my shirt, inside my shirt, carry them around and take them home. My brother Martin would do the same. We'd always had a couple of rabbits. We had, we must have had 6 or 7 rabbits, little rabbits at one time. We had them in the backyard in an old used water trough that has sprung a leak, so we didn't use it for anything else. We put these little rabbits in there. We'd feed them milk, dandelion greens, and so forth. And Mabel's husband's niece came to stay at our house. Margaret Erickson came to stay. And we were awakened one night about 9 o'clock. These little rabbits just squalling and squalling. We ran out there to the tank, and the darn cats had gotten in there.
Oh, Ken, I don't think you should tell that one.
Why?
That sounds awful.
Oh, we saved them.
You saved them?
Oh, we saved them, yeah. But Margaret Erickson and Martin cry, my gosh, oh, how they cried. They were heartbroken that those cats had gotten in there.